zoom and enhance.
It occurs to me that the Orcs Must Die series, and the tower defense genre as a whole, are something like a cousin to factory games like Satisfactory and Factorio. Those games focus on feeding raw resources like iron and coal into complex machines to efficiently produce spaceship parts, while Orcs Must Die is all about feeding hordes of cartoon monsters into machines that produce mulch cartoon monsters. Maybe one day we'll learn to build spaceships out of that goop, but for now it's plenty of fun on its own. Deathtrap shifts the series' reliable action tower defense gameplay into a new structure. Rather than a linear series of levels to figure out one at a time, we're put through a roguelite-style gauntlet of randomly selected stages, each with a mix of modifiers that can make both you and the orcs more powerful in some sometimes interesting ways. And it's all capped off by a boss fight. Burning through those can be a good challenge, especially with up to 3 friends in the new co-op cap of 4. But, like a lot of run-based games, it does eventually get a little too repetitious and grindy, and not the kind where you're grinding up orcs. Full disclosure, at this point I've played more than 60 hours of Deathtrap in co-op and single player, and I've only seen 3 of its 4 bosses and defeated 2. While it's generally IGN's policy to complete a game's content before writing a review, this is one of the rare cases where it's become clear that it's meant to take a very long time to check all the boxes. And also, I've already seen the great majority of what's here. Considering Deathtrap is even lighter on storytelling than Orcs Must Die has traditionally been, I think I can safely tie a bow on this review without grinding my way to a final cutscene.
So you're interested in becoming a war mage?
Setting out on your first run is as easy as picking a character and diving in, which is a no-brainer because one of the options is a cat with swords. If you're playing co-op and someone else gets to her first, it's understandable that you'd fall back on these other people, and you really can't go too far wrong. After cycling through them all and trying their diverse built-in ability sets like the tanky bear man, the sniper elf, and the blunderbuss lady with a pet dragon, I settled on Ren the mage as my favorite. Her rifle-like wand has an active reload minigame for bonuses, she summons proximity mines, recharges traps for quicker kills, and conjures 2 clones of herself to attack in triplicate. But it's a strong cast as a whole, even though there's not much by way of a plot beyond kill the orcs for them to act out. Immediately thereafter, you're presented with a choice of 3 maps to tackle, but this comes with a catch that complicates it and, for me, almost always overrides my preference for one map over another. If I'm playing as a sniper, I definitely do not want the one that reduces headshot damage by 50%, because zoomed-in headshots are my whole thing. And when you're playing in co-op, you have to make a group call that screws you all over the least. That's not to say the choice of map isn't important. They're mostly fairly large, bigger than what's been standard for the series, but smaller than Orcs Must Die 3's war scenarios. But there aren't that many, and after playing each one what feels like a dozen times or more, I've definitely developed favorites where I know how to control the orcs' paths, and also eye-rolling dislikes for those that are more wide open and almost impossible to fully wrangle unless you've lucked into certain upgrades. As long as the randomized modifier price isn't too high, I'll usually go for a map where I know I can set up lethal kill zones like these. Those feel like guaranteed wins. It's worth noting that while Deathtrap's orcs and maps look very much like the previous OMD games because of its cartoony art style and tons of blood and chunks, the lighting is notably improved. And that's something that's on full display when the nighttime and rain modifiers are in effect.
The rain's bringing water elementals! Watch out!
Those aren't just for looks, they come with randomly spawning enemies that can appear behind your barricade line, so you have to make sure to keep an eye on the minimap. Anyway, if I must though, I'll choose a stage like the Dry Docks map. A shipyard where the rift you're protecting can be in one of several locations, and there are more paths to each of them than the default number of barricades can block off. The opening phase of any Orcs Must Die map, and the unlimited length pauses between waves, are spent figuring out the puzzle of how to control the coming flow of enemies even as they open up new doors. Efficiently obstructing paths is tricky, and there are almost never enough barricades to go around, so you'll often have to make the best of a bad situation and fill any gaps with your own magical bullets. Why not simply buy more barricades, OMD veterans may ask. Well, Deathtrap revamps the way barricades are handled in a fairly radical way. Your team gets a set number that can be placed for free. The catch is that the only way to get more of these is the random upgrades at the end of each wave, and it's far from guaranteed. Overall, I like this change because it's an acknowledgement of how crucial barricades are, but it also serves as the number one way I know if a run is going to go well or not. If I don't luck into at least a few more, or better yet the upgrade that makes the ones I have twice as large, I'm probably going to have a rough time when the going gets tough. My other issue with how barricades are handled is that when you're playing in co-op, the team supply is evenly divided between you and your teammates. It sounds fair, but it's often annoying when you're the person with the plan but have to stop halfway through executing it to call over whoever has barricades left and instruct them on where to place them. So while it makes sense to have traps and cash divided between teammates to encourage you to synergize which death dealers work well together, I feel like barricades would have been much better off as a shared pool. A lot of those non-barricade upgrades can be quite powerful though. They could lend your default attacks major bonuses to ammo capacity, give them burn, freeze, or shock damage, or provide extra uses of special abilities among many other things. Extra proximity mines are great to have, for example, though not all is lost if you don't draw barricades.
Get down here!
Which traps you put where is the other big part of the puzzle, and since you can only carry a handful of them with you, and fewer in co-op, you have to carefully examine the map layout to see where you can place the best combos of floor, wall, and ceiling traps to both deal damage and rack up combos with multiple types of damage on single targets, and that's how you charge your most powerful abilities. There are a few dozen of these, the vast majority of which are old stalwarts like the brimstone floor tiles that set enemies ablaze, flippers that launch them into the sea, arrows right out of Indiana Jones, saw traps, freeze traps, acid traps, poison traps, you name it. A few new ones round out the arsenal, such as the harpoon that snags enemies and pulls them in, mine carts on tracks, and a heavy ice turret. I'll be very interested to see how the creative types out there combine all these toys.
Buenas, me.
Enemy variety is also largely recycled from Orcs Must Die 3, which has a lot to pull from, but it does at least build a bit on what came before. There's a drummer who doesn't attack but buffs enemies around him, the stone bat petrifies you with a projectile that takes you out of the action for several seconds and can be extremely annoying if you don't take them out, and there's also this weird flying dude, and this big weird flying dude with laser eyes, and this jerk who steals your money, and a bunch of returning guys with some new abilities and tweaks to refresh them. All in all, it's a more than healthy mix that keeps things interesting for a long while. After handling 6 waves on each map, you're given the option to cash out with the money you've made thus far, or wager half of it on whether or not you'll be able to beat the next map before enough orcs make it to your rift, which has persistent health. It's a smart mechanic because sometimes you'll just barely eke out a win with 1 or 2 rift points remaining and have to make a call about whether to go home and level up. To be honest, I much prefer this to feeling like I had to replay every level of previous OMD games without a single orc making it through my defenses to really feel like I'd beaten it.
Saw this victory from a mile away.
If you make it to one of the boss fights, Death Trap at least makes an effort to change up its style. There's only one large wave to deal with, but there's an extra powerful enemy walking or teleporting around the map while you do it. So you can go all in on inflicting as much damage on them as possible, or try to hold out until you exhaust the wave of enemies before turning your attention to the main target. That changes things up, but boss fights don't really turn any major ideas on their heads. Win or lose, you'll return to your fortress and use your cash to buy permanent upgrades that are sometimes meaningful, like the ones to each individual war mage that unlock or amplify abilities, or the ones that let you do plus 50% damage to bosses. Most of them, though, give you an almost imperceptibly incremental improvement to trap damage, speed, or other stats. Those are pretty underwhelming for how expensive they get. What eventually slowed my progress to a crawl was the fact that orcs steadily get stronger and more durable rather than just more numerous as you progress through a run. In the first mission, you'll one-shot most enemies before they can even reach your kill zone. By the 4th or 5th, everything seems to take several headshots to bring down. Sometimes it takes several reloads worth. It gets tiring, frankly, to have my weapons become so ineffective against fodder.
All that training. Where did it go?
Considering that each run consists of several missions, starting with 3 and going up by 1 every time you beat a boss, runs can get super long too. I've beaten 2 bosses, so I currently have to do 4 missions of 6 waves apiece before the boss fight, and each can take half an hour. That's a long time to wait just to lose. I wish there were a way to skip the first couple missions, which are effectively a foregone conclusion for me now, and go straight to the challenging ones. Also, a 4-player co-op game like this could sure use split screen while they're at it. Orcs Must Die Death Trap's roguelite spin on the Action Tower Defense series works pretty well. Even if most of its traps and endless parade of highly killable enemies are carried over from past games, the new War Mage's abilities and the combined impact of its randomized modifiers can really shake things up nicely for quite a few runs. Puzzling out how to steer the orcs to their doom and then taking part in the bloody carnage is as much fun here as it is in the rest of the series. I did lose steam due to the slow meta progression and the increasingly long series of missions, where the first ones are too easy and the latter ones got frustrating because of bullet sponge enemies. But of course that was only after a few dozen hours of happily chewing up orcs and spitting them out in both solo and in co-op. For more, check out our reviews of Dynasty Warriors Origins and Marvel Rivals. And for everything else, stick with IGN.